Of this interview today is, for example, today is October the 7th, right? 50 years ago, the Asaba massacre took place. Somebody went on television to give an interview about it, to just give the facts. It was a live broadcast. As the guy was talking, the NBC DG called the station and shut down the interview. This was an analysis of historical facts. That's the era we've entered now. And it's just an example of the type of censorship that's going on. And it's very dangerous. So.
But it will influence, as a matter of fact, over television and radio.
Not it's newspapers as well. It's a whole area in itself of what they're doing, and it's very worrisome. We'll talk about it.
How is that? Are we? All right. So let's start. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having us at your home. For the sake of introduction, can we just get your name, sir?
But why would you come to my house if you don't know my name? You should know my name now, eh? Call me FFK. All right. Call me FFK. Well, you know the address of the house, but you don't know the name. Okay, FFK. All right.
All right. Well, FFK is popular as well. You know it's Femi Fani-Kayode.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. All right, sir. The nation is 57. Just had our 57th anniversary. As a Nigerian who has been in the country and has seen how the nation has evolved over these years, how will you describe Nigeria at 57 in relation to the way with which the independence anniversary was celebrated across the country?
Well, first of all, let me say that I love this country, and I've dedicated my life to try my best to make a contribution to the development of this country at great risk and at a great price. And I'm very proud of that. And I've been involved in politics now for almost 30 years in terms of public commentary, in terms of active participatory politics, in terms of party formation, and in terms of fighting the military, June 12th struggle, and so on and so forth. And of course the fight against Abacha, coming in of Obasanjo, and various critiques of the Yar'Adua administration, Jonathan administration, which I eventually tried to help in terms of coming back in the campaign, and then also finally the Buhari administration, which we have today. So I think that I've had a wide span of experience, and I'm probably in a reasonably good position to make some assertions which may be surprising to some, but nevertheless are true. So, I mean, the short answer to your question is that as much as we all love Nigeria, clearly something is fundamentally wrong, and we need to recognize that fact. Once we recognize that fact, we now need to move to the next point, which is how do we solve the problem? And there are so many issues, and because we refuse to address those issues, and not just refuse to address them, we act as if they are not even there, and that there is no problem. Because of that, the challenges become more pronounced and worse as each year and as each decade passes by. Let me give you one example. The reasons for the 3-year civil war that we had, in which there were no less than 3 million casualties, including 1 million children, as you know, the reasons for that war are still very much with us today. Yet, some will say, no victor, no vanquished, and that all is well. Well, it's just not true. The factors that led to the war are probably more pronounced today, are more visible today, and far more widespread and pervasive today than they were in 1966, which resulted in the 1967 war to 1970. So that's a very good example. We still kill people with impunity. We still have, monumental examples of marginalization, ethnic supremacy, the imposition of the will of some over others, religious tensions, the determination of some to rule the country at the expense of others, with a religious and an ethnic aspect to it, something that nobody likes to talk about, but we all know what the problems are. We all know who the problem are, and we all know what is going on. And so that's just one example. Another example is the fact that let me give you another one. 50 years ago today, October 7th, 1967, after the Civil War started, there was an incident, a terrible incident, an atrocity rather, a barbarous atrocity that was committed in a place called Asaba, which is just on the border of Igbo land. Igbo-speaking people, they call them Ika Igbos. It's a town which is on the border of the Niger Delta area, what we call the Niger Delta area today, south-south, and the east, but predominantly an Igbo community. And during the course of the Civil War, the military went into that town, and basically led by Colonel Ibrahim Taiwo, and also the commanding officer of that particular unit was General Murtala Mohammed, who later became head of state. So these are the two relevant players in this. The soldiers went into that town, and the civilian population came out. It's a long story, but let me cut it short here, to welcome them, because all the soldiers, the Biafran soldiers that had been under Biafran occupation before, had already gone back into the east. They had retreated. So the soldiers, the troops left. So the civilian population came out, comprising of women, old men, and young boys, because all the fighting men, if you like, had run away because they feared that they may be mistaken for Biafran troops or who had now taken off their uniform. So basically you had a population of very, very young men, young boys, old men, and women. And they came out to welcome the Nigerian troops, chanting "One Nigeria, one Nigeria, one Nigeria," and expressing their support for the Nigerian troops that came in. And what did the Nigerian soldiers do? They herded them all into the center of the town, declared that they believed that they were collaborators with the Biafrans, and they proceeded to slaughter no less than, the records say about 1,000, but I suspect it's almost 2. You know, they always play these things down, but whether 1 or 2 makes little difference. This was barbarity, this was genocide, this was mass murder. This was a crime against humanity. And 50 years today, that is what happened. Nobody's talking about that today. We're talking about it now. Most Nigerians won't even be interested in hearing this. There was a ceremony down there in Asaba here where Professor Wole Soyinka spoke, and the book was written by a European. You see, enlightened people get very, very upset with such things because they know that these are things that happened 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years ago. These things are not meant to happen in a civilized society.
In this age of hate speech, you'll be accused of promoting ethnic sentiment. How would you take that?
Well, let's stick to the issue, because the question you've just asked me, really, I don't see where the hate speech is here. I haven't expressed my opinion about what I feel about those that do this. This is not hate speech. This is history. Historical facts, which they don't teach you in school. They removed from the curriculum of the schools in Nigeria because they don't want you to know the truth. And the things they did then, they're doing today. That's the point. Now, if you say that's hate speech, let's continue with the hate speech. Because in a civilized society, you express concern, which is what I'm doing now, when such things happen. Now, this happened 50 years ago. We didn't talk about the fact that 1 million children were starved to death during the Civil War. We didn't talk about the cause of the Civil War, the fact that over 100,000 Igbos were killed in the north. We didn't talk about that. You want to tell me that's hate speech too? Fine. Let's continue the hate. You don't want to talk about the fact that on January 15th, 1966, a whole load of people were killed by primarily Igbo soldiers, and it was an atrocity, okay, which we all felt bad about. My father was almost killed. He was the only one that was arrested that night that wasn't killed. That was an atrocity, and it's something we condemn wholeheartedly. That's the Nzogu coup. That is a historical fact. We can't run away from that. But what was the response to that? The response to that was that 6 months or so later, July 29th, the Northerners did their own coup, in which, 300 Igbo officers were killed in one night, an Igbo head of state was slaughtered in one night, and also a Yoruba military governor of the Western region who refused to let them slaughter the Igbo head of state at the time in his presence. They killed him as well. After that, a few months later, you now had a situation where, like I said, over 100,000 civilians were slaughtered in the north in retaliation, Igbo civilians, for what happened on January 15th. So it was a cycle of events, all of them atrocious, all of them unacceptable, all of them barbarous, and all of them are things that we should not forget, and we should study and analyze so that it will never happen again. But we don't do that here. Here, when you talk about such things, nobody wants to hear about it. They say it's hate speech. They say let's forget the past, forgetting that when you forget the past and you do not have justice for the atrocities that are committed against civilian populations in the past, that they will recur and they will come back worse. Now let me tell you the consequence of this. First thing is this: such things are happening today. That is why you can have soldiers to go to Nnamdi Kanu's house, kill no less than about 30 staff, which is what happened, including his cooks, his houseboys, some of his guests, burn his cars, kill his dogs, and nobody has heard from him since then. Nobody has seen him, nobody has heard from him since then. His lawyer came here the other day. He gave me a full briefing. I saw the video. These are the facts. This is not speculation. Yet it doesn't matter to Nigerians, because when you talk about that, like I'm talking to you, I say, oh, let's overlook it. It's hate speech. Until it happens to you or your family, it really doesn't matter. Let me give you another consequence. We have become so barbarous in this country that 1,000 Shiite Muslims can be slaughtered in one afternoon. Their leader can be blinded in one eye. His wife can be shot 4 times. He and the wife can be carried. Shot 4 times, he was blinded, and then he was put in a wheelbarrow. We all saw the pictures. And he's been locked up since. Nobody has heard from him. He hasn't been taken to court, nothing. He's been locked up for almost 2 years. Nobody talks about it. Talk about that, it's hate speech. Talk about that, oh, don't heat up the polity. Oh, let's talk about it. There's something wrong with us. Because people forget it can happen to you at any time. It's just the grace of God it didn't, or it hasn't. Let me give you another example. 1,000, well, not exactly 1,000, 800, because I'm very specific with my facts. 800 Christians were slaughtered in Kaduna last year Christmas Day, Christmas Eve. 800 by a group of Fulani militants. Fulani herdsmen, they call them in Nigeria. The international community, the International Terror Index, call them Fulani militants. They're described as the 4th most deadly terrorist organization in the world. They went there, and you know what they did? They slaughtered almost 1,000 Christians in their homes. None of them was arrested. None of them was apprehended. None of them has been prosecuted. They haven't even looked for them. And we're used to that. It really doesn't matter. You know why? It didn't happen to you. It didn't happen to me. And the militia that do these things are clearly protected, encouraged by the government. I had many people come to see me from southern Kaduna over the last 1 year or so that told me that, look, this is the norm. If it's not 1,000, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Happens all the time.
In all of this, can we get a solution?
Well, like I said, identify the problem first, then you now work on a solution. But here we're not even identifying the fact that there is a problem. The problem is impunity, barbarism, insensitivity, the lack of ability to empathize with the victims of these atrocities, and the fact that nobody seems to care. You are not even meant to talk about it, which is why they won't even let you, or they will try to stop you from airing this discussion we're having, because we're not meant to talk about these things. Let me give you an example of that. You say, oh, am I really sure? Let me give you one good example, 2 good examples. The first example is this. Like I said, 50 years ago today, that atrocity was committed. And all these things, by the way, make these people veritable candidates for the International Court of Criminal Justice. They're crimes against humanity, genocide, clear cases. Okay? But let me give you an example. You don't want to prosecute. You don't want to look back. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want anybody to know about it. And you took history out of your classes. So it keeps happening again now. Let me give you a rather startling example of where we are today in Nigeria. A few days ago, a gentleman got on television in this country. I think he was a historian, an analyst. He's not a politician. And he was talking about the Asaba massacre and saying the anniversary is about to come up, 50 years. It was a terrible atrocity, and this is what happened. And he started giving the facts. It was a live television program. During the course of that program, the NBC DG called the television station and said they must yank it off the air because it's something that mustn't be heard by anybody. And they stopped the program. That's one example. Censorship over historical issues. We won't talk about what happened today. He was just talking about what happened 50 years ago. Are those people that were slaughtered not human beings? Do people have such... I mean, is that the kind of society we're in? Give you another example. I gave an interview just after President Buhari came back from the UK to a leading television station. I very rarely give recorded interviews. I prefer to give live interviews. But they were very anxious and eager for me to speak. I said, fine, if you can come to my house. And by the way, I hardly give television interviews now. But
why?
I prefer to write. I prefer to write. It's more expressive. I get far more joy from that, which is why I write a lot. But they came to my house, and we had an extensive interview in depth. And I said some things which were factual and clear, which, of course, put the government on its toes. Very, very factual, very clear. And I stated my views, and I backed up these views. I stated my suspicions about Buhari. I stated my views about his Independence Day speech and so on and so forth. Would you believe that that interview, the same NBC and the Minister of Information and the presidency called the television and said, if you air that interview, we're going to close you down. And they have a list of people that are not allowed to speak on television anymore. Fayose is one of them. I am one of them. And when we speak, they censor everything. And they've threatened people. It's not just the television stations, the newspapers as well. I have columns in, I think it's about 13 media houses. 13. I used to have a column in the Sun newspaper. I didn't ask. They came to me. And I used to have a column in, what's that other one? Daily Telegraph. Also in Premium Times. I have about 10 or 13 others now, but those were there as well. Would you believe that the minute that the owners of those mediums joined the ruling party, they came and told me that I must modify my column. I must please take it easy because they're going through hell. And the publishers were being pressurized. And of course I refused to modify my column. Column was shot in the Sun newspaper. I wrote about the Igbo struggle. They called it down. Column was closed, or rather I withdrew the column because I said I'm not going to modify anything. Censorship. Daily Telegraph, the same thing. Censorship. They brought pressure. My column was getting more readers than anybody else in those papers because they were monitoring it. And I've been writing for them for about 2 years each. But they said no more. And Premium Times, Ribadu, who owns it, put pressure on the wedding director. They closed it. But I have about 13 others. Now, the problem we have here is that they don't want the truth to come out. All the traditional media, they close out such things. There was one particular newspaper in which a young man, the political editor, published one of my articles. I never asked him to do so. A leading newspaper. He published, and what was the article about? The killings in Kaduna and the arrest of Maikori, that young man. Okay, he published the article. Because he published the article, they almost sacked that young man, and they redeployed him and took him away from there. And one of the leading people in that newspaper called me and said, why am I bothering? These are northerners, they should be allowed to kill one another. Why am I sticking my neck out? That is how degenerate we have become. Okay? Now, it's across the board. The signal has been sent. Blacklist Fani-Kayode, don't let his articles come out in the mainstream media. Blacklist him from television. Stop Fayose from speaking. Do your best. And when they do speak, edit everything that you can. But unfortunately for them, we're in the 21st century with the internet. I have 13 other columns. And my 13 columns, when I write an article, each of them hit about 300,000, 400,000 over a week. So I'm hitting about 1.5 million people with what I write every week when I write. You can't stop that. And it's on the internet, it's there forever. 1.5 million, which is more than all the newspapers put together, you know, in the space of 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. So who are you trying to fool? You can't suppress the truth forever. The truth will come out. So that's where we are. Censorship, don't talk about history, don't talk about the past. So when you have a situation like that, how do you begin to even say you're going to solve the problem? You can't solve the problem.
But if you're so burdened with this problem and then you think there should be a solution, what do you think the solution should be in all this?
Well, the solution, it lies with the Nigerian people themselves. I won't blame the government. I won't blame the government. The government is doing what comes naturally to this particular government and this particular type of people. That is, suppress, tell lies, intimidate, threaten, persecute, and destroy. And you're not interested in running the country. You're not interested in doing anything positive. You're only interested in staying in power. And when you stay in power, when you say stay in power, you're talking about a certain section of the country ruling everybody else. That's what this government is all about. You introduce a religious agenda. You introduce an ethnic agenda. And you just want to hold on to power at all costs. And the reaction from the other side, which I suspect you might say may be a solution, which I think we're still a long way from, but we're fighting it, and we've been fighting it for a long time, because we knew this would happen. But, okay, we're here now, what do? The reaction is, oh, let's restructure the country. And the whole of the Southwest, the whole of the South, the whole of the Middle Belt, everybody that's anybody in these 4 zones has insisted on restructuring.
What
the people that have vetoed restructuring are the people from the core North, who are the ones that feel they have everything to lose because they'll no longer control the fortunes of the country. And that is the fundamental problem that we have here. And it's a constant problem. It has been so since 1966, and it will continue to be so until we determine to do the right thing, which is to restructure and to ensure that power is devolved from the center and everybody can run their own affairs and develop at their own pace. That's the solution to the problem. And also, a firm and clear recognition of the atrocities of the past, to acknowledge the fact that we committed barbarous atrocities. And it's not just the early 60s, it's not just the Civil War. You talk about Udi. I was in Obasanjo's government. I joined the government in 2003. Udi took place in his first term. I wasn't in government at the time, but I raised it with the president before I joined his administration. I wrote about it at the time, and I condemned it at the time. And, you know, he rationalized it the way he could. Well, it was his government. But I stated my objections then. That was something that was unacceptable in my view.